Welcome to International Forum. Today our program is about Afghanistan. It has been 5 years since the American-led military operation overthrew the Taliban regime and helped establish the Karzai government in Kabul. But in today's Afghanistan, instead of the country becoming more secure and stable, violence has surged across the country from the north to the south. And in the east and south of the country, there's a Taliban resurgence, which threatens the very existence of the Karzai government. What happened? What went wrong? What are the implications if Afghanistan should fail? What are the implications for America on its wider war on terror? And what are the things that we can still possibly do to reverse course in Afghanistan? These are some of the questions we hope to explore in the program today. And joining us once again is Ambassador Robert Finn, the former United States ambassador to Afghanistan, and currently a resident scholar and lecturer in international relations at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. Welcome, Ambassador Finn.
Thank you.
It's so good to have you back. Yeah, it's so good to have you back. First, tell us, please, how bad is the situation in Afghanistan?
Well, I don't think the situation is quite as dismal as perhaps you do, or you seem to. I think there are lots of dangers, and there has been an increase in violence. A lot of the problems are endemic problems that we're seeing in a different light now, and circumstances have made things change. So that, for example, with the presence of more foreign troops in the border areas, with the presence of government officials and the presence of police, there are more encounters with the Taliban. So part of the increase in incidents of violence, and there has been a dramatic increase, can be attributed to that. I don't think the Karzai government is at an end. I don't think Afghanistan is failing. I think, as I've said many times in the past, that we need to have more troops there, and we certainly need to have more money for development and reconstruction. That's the important thing. We need to show the people of Afghanistan that this government can do things for them. The Taliban are well aware of this, which is why they have a program of destroying reconstructed facilities. They burn down hundreds of schools because not only does that then prevent children, and particularly girls, from going to school, it also leaves this charred monument in a town or a village that shows everyone that they are around and they're there. So we have to deal with that.
What you describe as happening in Afghanistan reminds one of what is going on in Iraq. Do you see a connection between what's going on in Iraq and what's happening in Afghanistan?
Well, there's a connection in that the fundamentalists have imported some of the techniques from Iraq to Afghanistan, such as suicide bombers, something that was never there before. And there has been a flow back and forth. I think the basic nature of the problem in the two countries is quite different, in that Iraq, as we see, is a fragmented state with different ethnic groups, ethnic or religious groups, depending on how you want to slice it, that don't necessarily agree or ever have agreed with one another. Whereas in Afghanistan, you have a country that is tribally separated and ethnically separated, but nevertheless an entity. There's a consciousness of Afghanistan, of being Afghan, and in the past, over centuries, the Afghans have united when they feel threatened as a nation. So it's a different thing. Nobody's trying to break Afghanistan up into different countries. Everybody's trying to take over Afghanistan and rule the country, and that has always been the case.
Now, who exactly are the insurgents in Afghanistan? It's more than just the Taliban, isn't it?
Well, it's the Taliban plus Al-Qaeda, and this actually, I think, might be a key to how to deal with this. President Karzai has just called for a jirga on a tribal council to be held on both sides of the border, one in Pakistan and one in Afghanistan. And the idea is to get the tribal leaders together and to get them to condemn violence and to get them to condemn these foreigners, the Al-Qaeda foreigners, who are mostly Arabs, but they actually come from many, many different countries, including Uzbeks and Chinese and adventurers from around the world, and to get rid of those people, to extrude them, to separate them, because they're a foreign element that's bringing down the wrath of the world upon the tribal groups that live on both sides of the Afghan-Pakistan border. So this is kind of a new way of looking at it, to try to separate the ethnic problem, the problem of a tribal society, a very traditional tribal society that is trying to maintain its way of life, which maybe you and I don't think is a good way of life, but nevertheless they want to have their way of life, and to separate that from the Taliban, who are religious radicals trained in madrasas, mostly in Pakistan, but some also in Afghanistan, and then Al-Qaeda, who bring in the money, who are foreigners, who are arguably using and manipulating these people for their own political ends. Now, I don't know if this will work, but I understand what he's trying to do in doing this. And this is one way, maybe, of peeling that onion so you can have a kind of peace.
Now, how large... this is really two questions. How large is the Taliban presence in Afghanistan today, and how popular are they among the people?
I can't quantify it for you. I don't know. And I think...
Reports have said that they're in control of a large parts of the southern part of...
well, I don't know what in control means in a place where there are no roads and no electricity and no structures. In control of what? Does that mean that they can show up and take over a government building for a few hours and call people and say, ha, we're here? Yeah. Okay. Does that mean that they can administer and run this? Do they have a government there? No, absolutely not. They didn't have a government even when they controlled Afghanistan. That was one of their problems. You know, their concerns were all for the next world, not for this one. So being in control is a very, very relevant term. And one of the problems of Afghanistan has been in the past, not just in the current situation, but going back for decades, and certainly again today, that the central government in Kabul has not been able to administer the whole country. It is a huge and very, very poor country that has not been developed. Before all of this started, it was one of the poorest countries in the world, and it remains that.
True, true. Who is to blame for the Taliban resurgence in Afghanistan?
I don't know that there's a blame. I think it's just...
just the course of events?
Yeah, it's a dynamic that's changed. First of all, the Taliban stepped up their attacks when NATO forces appeared in the area, thinking that they could dissuade them from fighting back by making it tougher.
But the NATO forces went over to the border regions in response to escalated violence in that area.
Both ways.
So it's a chicken and egg
it's a chicken and egg kind of thing. But certainly the number of attacks that have increased, one reason for it is that they thought that they could get these people and discourage them from wanting to fight. Two, there are more soldiers there to attack. Okay. And as we've seen in news reports coming from British soldiers there, emails and things, the amount of resistance they expected was larger, that they met was larger than they had expected. So partly it's going back to what I said before, because they're there, these things are happening. But also the attacks are increasing, and we have the problem that's been openly discussed in the press of a large part of the attacks now coming from the Pakistan side of the border. The agreement that the Pakistan government made at the beginning of last month to basically remove its forces from northwest Waziristan is the second agreement. They made a similar agreement last year.
Which didn't work.
Which didn't work. And
because the Taliban kept coming and going between.
Worse, they set up an office in Wana, the capital of South Waziristan. And indications are the same thing may be happening in North Waziristan. Plus, you had the two Pakistani provinces of Baluchistan to the south and the Northwest Frontier Province to the north that are both controlled by a religious party that is also very lax towards the Taliban. So now you have the very frightening spectacle of basically the entire Afghan-Pakistan border being in the hands of people who are tolerant towards Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And the Pakistan government is trying to work against this. Just over the weekend, they arrested 40 people in Baluchistan. They're trying to crack down, but the fact is that they have not been successful in cracking down over the last few years, which is why they signed those two agreements in the tribal areas. Now again, there's a long history here. This goes all the way back to British India, and the British also did not control those areas.
Nobody dared touch or go near the area, right?
No,
the area had always been autonomous.
The tribal areas. The agreement under the British Raj was that they would send political commissioners. They would have a few checkpoints, and they would be able to maintain British law along certain major roads and for something like 15 feet on either side of the road. And the situation has now reverted basically to that again. So, you know, this is long before anybody heard of the Taliban. These were just tribal people who wanted to live in their own autonomous way. And there are the tribal areas in the very north of Pakistan. So there's a whole other sociological element to this problem that has been kind of overlooked in the face of the international political relation.
So are you saying that then the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which actually serves as routes for the Taliban to come and go. They come into Afghanistan from Pakistan to mount some attacks, and then when pursued, they retreat into Pakistan. That will continue, and that this is really a problem without a solution?
Well, this is a problem for which we need to find a solution.
What might that be?
Well, we'll have to see what it will be. First, you have the physical problem of an extremely difficult border. It's mountainous terrain. There are no roads. The tribals know the ways through, but other people don't know the way through, so it's their control. You have people living on both sides of the border who do not recognize that as a border. For the Pashtun tribesmen, the Durand line that was the border was an artificial line set up by colonial administrators. It doesn't mean anything to them. It's been a consistent problem in Afghan-Pakistani relations. And then you have the problem of how do you deal with the people in the area? How do you deal with these foreigners who are there? You also have the problem that Pakistan says we're a sovereign country. Foreign troops cannot come into our country. So when as you point out, when the coalition soldiers come up to the border, they can't go across, even though they know these people are on the other side. So this is not insoluble, but it's something that has to be solved, and there have to be discussions about this. Modalities can be made for something like this.
Solved by the governments of Pakistan, Afghanistan, the U.S., and the NATO countries.
Right. That's right. Yeah, you set up a system of hot pursuit which means that if you had people who are attacking on your side of the border and they run to the border, you had the right to go after them into the other side. Okay, that's one of the things you can do. It doesn't mean that you go in there and you conduct searches and raids, but when you know these are the people and you see them run across the border, that the other government says, okay, you can go and catch those people. That's one way of doing it. They have to work on this.
But without more money and more troops, is this actually doable? In other words, yes, on paper, one say there should be a solution and there could be a solution, but everybody's hands are tied because of lack of money, lack of troops. The NATO commander in Afghanistan had requested more troops, just 1,000 more soldiers for Afghanistan for 18 months. Nobody had responded. Well,
they finally did. They finally gave them the troops. Yeah, but if I'm correct,
very recently. Then.
Yeah, very recently. But I think those are probably insufficient. I mean, I agree with you. They need more troops and they need more money. They need more money for reconstruction. Afghanistan has been underfunded from the very start. It's been one of the main problems. I mean, if you do all the math, you wind up with Afghanistan got about 25% of what it needed, and you can't do it that way.
Do we recognize the problem or the magnitude of the shortfall of resources committed?
Some people do.
What about the government, the policymakers in Washington today?
I'm sure they're aware of it. They have other budget constraints too, but I think that they should make a determination that Afghanistan is the first priority and win this war.
It seems to be that as a result of this vastly increased violence in Afghanistan in 2006, that there is a renewed attention paid to Afghanistan, a focus on Afghanistan. The Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist had just made a trip, came back from a trip to Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Kuwait, Jordan, and met with government officials, our troops, and medical doctors, what have you. And he said that, well, I now recognize, you see, he says, my visit confirmed that the battle against the Taliban cannot be won by the military alone. We must win the hearts and minds of the Afghans targeted for recruitment through job creation and government provision of enabling services such as education and health care. So do you believe that this represents a kind of new recognition of the problem we have in Afghanistan? And once you recognize the problem, then you can think about ways to tackle it.
Well, maybe a new recognition by Senator Frist, and there's an election coming up. It's not new in other terms. He further went on and called for dialogue with the Taliban and including them in the ranks in the government. And that's something that's been called for at least twice before that I can think of, by both Karzai and by Ambassador Khalilzad when he was there. And that's typically what you do in any kind of civil war situation. You come to a point where you offer an amnesty. If people will lay down their arms, if they will live within the law, then you allow them to return to their homes and resume a civil life. That's one of the ways you atrophy a civil situation. But what he said is true. The indications are that because of this foreign funding by al-Qaeda, soldiers who work for the Taliban, and I use soldiers in a very loose way because it may be just someone who's sent to put a bomb in one place or sit by a road and see who goes by for a few hours, they get more money than the soldiers do who work for the National Army. So you have that. Of course we need reconstruction, we need schools, we need jobs. You need to show people that this government can work and function and bring you a better life. And then the other claims of the Taliban, al-Qaeda, I think they'll wither away.
Well, it's a matter of whether the things that we should be doing, i.e. committing more resources, will happen in time to prevent the situation from deteriorating further.
That's right. You can't do it on the cheap, and you can't expect it to solve itself because it's not there. Eventually it should. I mean, the final solution, bad term, but the solution for Afghanistan is to develop a self-sustaining economy. And if it has a self-sustaining economy, then it can say to people, look, you don't have to deal with these people. We have a state that's functioning. We have a government that's functioning. We can give you a better life. And then the claim of the Taliban, al-Qaeda, will be much less appealing to people. And in many cases, if you read the interviews with the villagers, what they want is security. They don't necessarily want either of them there. They just want to be left alone. They want to be secure in their houses, and they want to be able to live as people would anywhere.
So in other words, the locals are not. I mean, are there sentiments and loyalties with the government, or sort of undecided?
I think they're probably undecided. I think if they saw the government, we get incidental information from people. If the government were there and present in many places, then they would have a better opinion of it. The complaint from many places, particularly in the southeast, is that the government hasn't really been there. The power has reverted to the same local commanders, military people, warlords, call them whatever you want, who were there and part of the problem in the first place. And that no matter what happens, they're the ones who pay the price. The foreign soldiers come by day and demand that they deal with them, and then the Taliban come by night and demand the same thing, and the poor villagers are caught in the middle.
Yeah. Here comes a difficult question, which is, will America and the West stay to see Afghanistan through? There is now a creeping skepticism among Afghans and Pakistanis about the seriousness of the American and NATO commitments to stay in Afghanistan.
Well, I think the commitments are there. I have heard the same comments, and I understand how they feel. And don't forget, this war has now gone on for a long time, longer than World War II. So they have very good reason to be apprehensive. But I have not seen any indications on the part of either the United States or other international leaders that they're going to quit or give up in Afghanistan.
Not yet, though. Not yet, because a CNN poll last week showed increased doubt among the American public as well, whether we should stay in Afghanistan. When asked, do you favor or oppose the U.S. war in Afghanistan, 50% said they were in favor, 48% they were opposed. Now, in the heady days of 2001, 2002, 80 or 90% of the people were fully in support of the continued American presence in Afghanistan.
Right. Well, that's perfectly normal. That was 2002. This is 2006, almost 2007, and they haven't won the war yet.
Yeah.
People get tired of war. People don't like war.
Yeah, but
I mean, I consider that to be normal. They have to show success, and then the popularity of that war will increase.
Yeah.
And it's also there's a trade-off effect from Iraq, which is a much less popular war and military action.
But I feel that we're faced with a dilemma here. The more it looks like that Americans and the West will leave Afghanistan, the harder it is to gain Afghan villagers' cooperation. And the Afghan farmers will become less willing to give up their profitable opium crops. And perhaps the Pakistani government also will become less willing or able to cooperate with both the Afghan government and Americans in its fight against the insurgency. Because they say, well, you know, we haven't been successful so far, and it just might be that the Taliban could regain, and so why should we?
Well, the answer to that is to increase the efforts, because losing is not an option in Afghanistan. I mean, all those things you say are true. On the other hand, I think if we look at the polls from Afghanistan, we'll see that most of the people there still want the Karzai government to be in power and not want the Taliban to be in power. If there's been a change of opinion, it's a change of opinion of people who are afraid, who say, well, maybe, you know, the Taliban can come in this area if they give us peace. But in fact, overall, the people of Afghanistan still support the Karzai government and its efforts, and my position is that we have to increase our efforts there. We can't. It's not an option for us to say, oh, gee, it didn't work out, let's go home. Yeah, we're in an international war on terrorism. You know, before this ever happened, before September 11th happened, I was the ambassador in Tajikistan, and I said to our government that international terrorism has chosen us as a target. We don't have the option of deciding whether or not we'd like to be involved in this battle. It's not our choice. They've already chosen us as a target. We have to fight it.
We have, but that is a normative statement. But the question is, I'd like to ask you, with all the positions you have been in, ambassador to Tajikistan and Afghanistan, etc., have you ever sensed that America may abandon Afghanistan as America did in the 80s after the Soviets were driven out?
I don't see indications that that's going to take place.
You have never sensed any?
Not since 2001. No, the commitment is still there. Now, what we do and how we do it, that has changed, and that's healthy. You should change your tactics and your plans according to the situation to try for success. And I'm not saying everything that's been done has been successful. It clearly hasn't. But the commitment is very much still there.
That's very good. What would be the first three things that you would do if you were in charge of the American policy in Afghanistan?
Well, I would increase the money for reconstruction. I would increase the support for the Afghan government, which means that they have to do some extensive house cleaning. One of the problems is that the Afghan government is not seen as running the country. It has to be seen as running the country.
They're seen as weak, corrupt.
Right. So they need some extensive house cleaning on their part. On the other hand, they have to take charge of their own house at the same time, and that's part of it. And then they have to have the money to make the changes.
Right.
One of the consistent criticisms have been that the reconstruction program is being run by foreigners with foreign personnel, and that a lot of the money sort of never gets down to the grassroots. It's just recirculated back out abroad. That's a systemic problem in all reconstruction efforts that I've seen. I've been involved, sadly, in other such circumstances. It happens in other places. That's something that the international community needs to work on, both for Afghanistan and also for just this kind of problem. And the third thing is get at the drug problem, which is not going to be solved in a year. Everyone refers to 2001, the year that the Taliban banned drugs. Well, they banned drugs because they had enormous stocks in their depots. They just drove up the price a little. Had they been around longer, I'm sure they would have restarted cultivation. Anyway, that's an aside remark. But we have to work on their problem, and that means building roads. It means bringing jobs to people. It means changing the whole circumstances of rural Afghanistan. It also means getting at the drug dealers. And that's the middlemen in Afghanistan, the people who are making the profits there, and the people in Western Europe who are making the big money when they sell it on the streets. And all of the Western countries, with the exception of Britain, have fallen down in this. They're not doing anything to control consumption at their end. If there were no consumption, there would be no production.
Well, but that's like saying that if only there were no smokers in the world any longer.
Well, we can work on that too.
Overall, are you optimistic or pessimistic about A, the future of Afghanistan, and B, the future of America's war on terror?
I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic. I think that well, in the long term, yes, we will win. I think this is something that we're going to be dealing with for a very long time to come, in both Afghanistan and certainly in the world. It's not something that's going to go away in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years.
And
this is what's going to be shaping our life for the next few decades, unfortunately.
And there's still much that we can do.
Yes, we're just at the beginning of this struggle, I fear.
With that, thank you. Thank you very much for being with us today, Ambassador Robert Finn. Hope you come back to see us soon again.
Thank you.
For an update. Thank you for watching today. This is Mei Chang for International Forum.